All right, let's get moving. Welcome back, everybody. Just as a reminder, I am recording this meeting. Got a few things to talk about. Appreciate all the comments that were submitted. Let's see. Joe, you on the call, sir? All right. I see Joe's not here right now. Dylan or Nicole, did you guys want to kick off with your items that you wanted to revisit, sir and ma'am?
Yes, Your Honor. Good morning.
Good morning.
Nicole Zeichner on behalf of OPC. Yes, I could start. So the first that we had provided comments on two topics. The first is a method by which to set the greenhouse gas abatement goals. We know that the potential study is going on, but we realize that there could be some limitations to the study. So we would like, ideally, the commission to engage in a process starting relatively soon so that stakeholders can have input on those goals, and then the utilities can develop their plans after that process has occurred. We feel like it wouldn't be ideal for the utilities to put that much effort and resources into developing their plans until all stakeholders have had an ability to provide comments. And as to the other topic, and I guess there would be different ways that could look. We would like everyone to be able to provide comments, even the parties that may not be able to get involved in a litigated proceeding. So maybe there's a way for that to be done either through, a comment period, or everyone could submit evidence, but we wouldn't want that process to exclude the parties that may not have the ability to get involved in a very extensive litigated proceeding. And as to goals for limited and moderate income households, we do believe it should be a greenhouse gas goal. We feel that if we don't do that, the limited and moderate income households could be left further behind as inevitably we transition to moving away from greenhouse gas usage or greenhouse gas production. And I'm sorry, my dog is, sorry. So those are the two areas we provided comments on, and we're open to any questions.
All right, why don't we hit the greenhouse gas abatement goal first in the process? It looked like, I don't want to speak for Jim Gravatt, but it seemed like he was envisioning something similar. Does anybody have any responses, comments, questions, criticisms on the greenhouse gas abatement goal in the process? Yes, Taylor.
Good morning.
Good morning.
Navigating screens here, so give me just one quick minute. I'm going to turn my camera on.
Take your time.
Thank you guys for all of your input, and we appreciate OPC's position, and I guess we'll hear from Jim a little bit later. But one of the things that I just wanted to highlight for the group is, the utilities are working and have moved forward with the greenhouse gas abatement potential study. And one aspect of that study does include the stakeholders to engage with the vendor who's conducting that study. In fact, that was one of the requirements within the RFP. And as everyone knows who's been engaged in those meetings so far, we are hoping to have bi-weekly engagement sessions with that vendor study, or with that vendor as they're conducting that study. To the extent that what it sounds like, and please let me know if I'm mischaracterizing any of your positions, what it sounds like is an ask for some sort of commission proceeding that would allow for stakeholder input. We hear you, and we want to make sure that the goal is or that it's very transparent while we're setting these goals. But from the consensus document that we worked really hard to put together and that everyone agreed on, we said we'd start with this study, and we need to get the data from the study before we can really start this goal setting process. So the idea is, let's give the study some time to work and to get through what we're putting all this effort and time towards before we start trying to set goals. I mean, we really want to have data-driven goals here. So And plus, not to mention, we've got a working group report that we've got to get done that's right there in front of us. So I don't really want us to put the cart before the horse here and start talking about opening another proceeding when we don't even have the data from the study and we're still trying to really finalize this working group report. So I'll just leave that there and let the group think about that. But I think that'd be the position. And anyone from the utilities, please jump in if I've led everyone astray.
All right. Thanks. Go ahead, Nicole. No need to
Okay.
raise your hand. Just jump in.
We would ask that commission proceeding begin in August. So we do anticipate that either around August or maybe shortly after that time, we will have some preliminary numbers from the greenhouse gas abatement study. Is that generally accurate? Would people agree that we might not have a report by then, but we thought maybe by late summer, early fall, we might have some numbers to work with?
I don't want to commit to, let's get back to that. I think that's one of the things that we're going to be talking about in this consistent engagement with that vendor. Sitting here today, I don't want to say, yes, August will have numbers, because I'm not so sure that we will. So that's one of the issues that we're working through and really trying to get in terms of the timeline, which you guys know is something that we're kind of constrained on here. So I don't know that if we start a commission proceeding in August, we'll be working with hard numbers. I'd err on the side of we won't be working with hard numbers. We may have some information, but again, I don't want to make that commitment.
If I can add a little quickly, we suggested August as a time to sort of get the proceeding going. I don't think there's any that potential study is. We've been very careful all along to say that is not the only thing that is going to be used to set goals, but it's obviously a very important one. And we're not talking about really trying to figure out goals before we have those numbers, Taylor. So I don't know what the dates are. You don't know what that timeline is. I think what OPC is trying to do is to foreshadow and get people thinking about, including the commission, when they get this report in April, anticipating needing to have some kind of a process that it is getting going as that study is sort of being completed. So that's, I think, the idea, very much to make use of that study, but also to give the commission an opportunity to hear other considerations, other information that they would use to set goals in addition to the estimates of savings potential that is going to be so important. So I think that's maybe that's a helpful clarification. I also think that it needs to be done pretty efficiently in order to result in some goal direction for the utilities as they go into their actual planning from the next cycle. So it can't be a 9-month process, right? I mean, we're talking about a 3-month process or something like that. So I think anticipating what that commission proceeding could look like, having it get going procedurally, so that it's ready to move forward substantively as soon as that study is available.
Understood, and definitely appreciate you guys' position. And I think that to some extent, maybe over the summer, but I just don't want us to lose sight of the fact that we've got this study going, and that's a really big effort that we're working towards, that this group has kind of agreed that we're going to move forward with. And we negotiated all the kind of background of that, or really the RFP. And so I just don't want us to get too far ahead. And I hear you guys. I don't think that you're suggesting that, but I just want to make sure that we're all aware that we really want to. This study is a big thing, and it really is, if not the primary, but a very important part of setting these goals moving forward.
Jim, you had your hand up, sir.
Good morning, Your Honor. Good morning, everyone. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. pleasure to be with you again on this Thursday. I just want to say I want to second everything that Dylan said. I think it's exactly right, and OPZ's position that there should be a proceeding. I don't have an opinion on when it should start, and I'm sure everyone will recall, some fairly intense discussions about the RFP and the potential study and its role, what it should be expected to do, and some quite substantive disagreement that I had with some of the language in the RFP, which was, there was some, there were a few concessions, but there's a lot of my views that were not included in the RFP and in how the process should be conducted. And importantly, while I'm grateful and excited and look forward to stakeholder engagement on the process, it's very clear that the utilities and the contractor get the final word on how they're going to do the study. So there's engagement, but no obligation that even if we provide reasonable arguments, that the vendor has to follow them. So I think it is important to have some kind of proceeding or process, as Dylan and Nicole have said, where we get to put in evidence and try to convince the commission of what the goals should be, consistent with whatever is going to come out of the General Assembly. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, jump in, Taylor.
Jim, I just want to push back lightly a little bit on what you said in terms of the utilities having the final say. We really don't. We've worked very hard to, we've got a vendor that's got the expertise, and, we all can provide our input, but I think we pushed back really hard during that negotiation process to really give the vendor the final say on how the study is conducted. So I don't think that that's a correct assumption or a correct statement to say that the utilities have the final say. We're just kind of navigating it and leading that study, and we're the ones who had to do the contract. The word is escaping me. We led the RFP process, if you will. So I don't think that it's really the utilities having the final say. And I don't want you all to say that, or to hear that what I'm advocating for is some sort of cloaked process where there's not stakeholder input on setting these goals. It's more so that I just want it to be clear that we did work hard to make sure that stakeholders were able to give bi-weekly input to the vendor throughout the course of the study. And then moving forward from there, there's certainly other considerations, because I've got this consensus document right in front of me. And, we said, as well as other information deemed relevant by the commission, but we said the goal setting would be informed by that utility specific study. So to that end, I just want it to be clear that it's not really the utilities leading this vendor along a path to come to some sort of conclusion.
Thank you for that. I appreciate that perspective. There may not be an overt situation where the vendor says to the utilities, well, how do you want us to handle this? But you're paying the vendor. The vendor will want to get hired again by the utilities to do work in the future. I'm not saying they're going to not do their very best to reflect stakeholder input, but there's a reality here. We've seen it all across the country through all these companies who do these potential studies. They need to keep working. That makes sense. They get paid by utility companies to do these studies. It makes sense. They're not going to do what I think is right if it's contradictory to what the utility's position is. I think that's just a reality, and I don't mean to disparage anyone in that comment. It's just it's about work and business and the realities of how the system is. So, and I also want to make sure I say, I don't think I just did, I really appreciate the concessions that the utilities and other parties have made in this potential study process. I appreciate the opportunity to participate. But I think that's a little different than saying there is joint decision making across all the parties. So thank you.
Thank you, sir. We got Dylan and then Josh.
Thank you, Your Honor. And I don't think I introduced myself today. I'm Dylan Voorhees with VEIC, working with OPC. I just wanted to also state, as it says in the OPC comments, and make sure that we're understanding, this is not really only a process to hash out disagreements about what the potential study says or doesn't say or should have said or shouldn't have said. There are a bunch of other things that the commission needs to take into consideration when they set goals. And that the goal framework, the sort of consensus goal framework from last year, had a bunch of different things in it. For example, it had sort of open percentages on how much savings should come from behind the meter versus front of the meter. We know that the potential study is not fundamentally focused on front of meter savings opportunities, but we acknowledge that there could be some savings from those. Non-energy greenhouse gas savings from refrigeration, for example. So the commission will need to establish some of those parameters that the potential study probably won't answer. In addition, of course, there's other policy considerations. What is the level of ambition? What is they don't have to approve budgets, but generally, how are we going to balance costs and benefits? What about the policy, the greenhouse gas policies of the state or other state policies? So I think there's quite a variety of considerations that the commission will want to hear about and think about, even if the potential study is fantastic and everybody sort of agrees with its outcomes. So I just want to sort of add that fuller context of why such a proceeding will be, I think, helpful for the commission. Thank you.
Thanks, Dylan. Josh.
Thanks, Your Honor. Josh McClellan with Washington Gas. I just wanted to respond to Mr. Gravatt's comment about the whole perception about AEG and business development and continuing to work with utilities. I just want to say, from my perspective and from a utility perspective, that is not a very accurate reflection of kind of how that relationship is managed and facilitated during these types of studies and program implementation. The bottom line of it is yes, there's an agreement that is put together between the utilities and the contractor, in this case AEG. And then from that is also a work scope, which is going to lay out all the deliverables and all the components and elements that are going to comprise the potential study, all of which have had, all stakeholders have had an opportunity to contribute to and make comments to. And so I just want to set the record straight here is AEG continuing to work with utilities is not going to be predicated on the fact that they're going to pander to the will and of the utilities. It's going to be based on whether or not they met the obligations and the objectives and the deliverables of the contract, which all the parties in this work group have had a chance to take a look at least specific to the potential study. So it's not about whether or not AEG is going to just do what we want them to do, or we're never going to work with them again. I think that's not a very accurate perception of what's of the reality here. So thanks.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right, go, Joe.
Yeah, I have a question for OPC and the advocates. Do y'all have like a technical committee or somebody, or it sounds like you're talking about going into the fall into commission hearings with the commission, present to talk about some very technical issues that are way in the weeds. And when I say way in the weeds, it doesn't mean they're not important. I've had chiggers before, but they're things that the commission is not, I'm pretty confident will not have the bandwidth to really be focused on. And so it seems like the really important piece of this, at least for the study, is to make sure that you have the guns in the room or whatever who know what's going on and who can speak AEG's language and understand the tech at the level of granularity that I assume that they're going to get, which is, tech measure by measure and market by market. And so I guess that's and to me, it seems to me that that needs to happen way before August. Those are discussions that should be happening yesterday, really. I mean, most of the measures that are going to be in that study, we already know what they are. They're in the portfolios. And so people could be looking at what's already being assumed by the utilities and starting to have those arguments, if that's what y'all are planning to do. And because there are a ton of things to argue about. I argue about them every day with all sides. And it's kind of, in terms of the bigger process, it's almost none of my business, but I just remind people, in case you weren't around for the last time that a potential study, this process went on, we had a cost, Mia and staff convened, I don't know, a year or something with lots of stakeholders inside the state and outside the state. Everybody and their dog was in those discussions or invited to those discussions to talk about cost effectiveness. And in fact, I think it was AEG who was doing the potential study, or it may not have been, but whoever's doing the potential study, ultimately, there was too much argument about all these different assumptions, and there was no the potential study didn't come out in time to inform the commission decision on the 2% goal. The 2% goal was actually, or my recollection is probably oversimplified, was VEIC saying you can get 2%, and the commission didn't have any other number. And so they said, okay, 2%. So that's my caution here, is just that you're going to end up at that same place if we don't get on the ball.
All right. Thank you, sir. Jim, did you want to weigh in on that, sir?
Thank you. Just very briefly, Joe, I also filed comments in that proceeding saying potential study is a very important piece of data, but we can't wait any longer. There's ample evidence that they can get 2%. And with that, so it was, I think, a combined effort with OPC and the advocates in 2015. But the thing is, and I apologize for that echo, I don't know why it's there, but potential studies are generally count from the bottom up. They count what is known. They don't look at, in a more fulsome way, what might be possible. That's generally the experience. And I know there are going to be some scenarios, and I think that'll be useful. I think the point, and Dylan has made this point, is it's just not the only evidence. So whether, Joe, to your question, whether there should be some kind of technical proceeding with the commission, the commission's going to decide what the goals are, I think, unless the legislature does it for them. And whatever evidence they feel is appropriate is what they're going to base their decision on. I think our position is there should be evidence that should be presented, and then they should base their decision on that. And I think the concern is we'll have a potential study and then no proceeding, and people may have very different opinions about whether that potential study really captures all the opportunity. And there's no way to inform the commission of these other perspectives so that they can then have a full set of information to make their decision with. That's the concern. I mean, and this is what happens all over the country. I mean, potential studies are done as part of utility goal setting, and then it's litigated. And it's the commissions who make the decisions, whatever their technical knowledge is, for better or worse. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim. Dylan.
Thank you, Your Honor. I think Jim said a couple of things that are important. It's I think a key idea is that there should be a commission opportunity to weigh some different evidence, and I think it's unlikely the commission will try to unpack at a technical level the potential study. So it does speak to the importance and value of technical capacity in that potential study. And I guess it's maybe sounds a little self-serving as one of the experts that is supporting one of the parties, but I would very much welcome the staff and MEA to bring technical capacity to that stakeholder conversation, because Joe is absolutely right. There were a lot of critical decisions that will be made in that potential study. It is why OPC and others asked for a robust sort of stakeholder engagement, but folks need to be there to take advantage of that. Otherwise, whatever the sort of business relationship, without that, it's the utility and their experts figuring it out, and that's important and valuable, but it's not really balanced. So I welcome other technical expertise in that process. At the end of it, the question is, what happens then? And that's sort of yes, you've got a big fat potential study. It's very technical. It gives you a bunch of information about what may be economically feasible. And then I think it's really a question of timing. Ultimately, of course, the commission is going to make those decisions. What OPC is really pointed out is that we want to have a proceeding after that potential study is done, but before the utilities get all the way through their process and then are done with that process and say, okay, we figured it out. Potomac Edison said this, PG&E says this, we did all the math, here it is, it's August 2023, and we want approval. That is not a good time and process to make sort of big policy considerations about what the goals should be.
Thanks, Dylan. Why don't we go to Nicole, then Joe?
Thank you. And that is part of the reason why we would like a transparent and structured process, because we feel like that would give the parties time to plan for any experts that they may need or any consultants that they may need, versus maybe a one meeting where everyone has to retain and come up with experts to appear at this one meeting. So I think that's part of the value of such a transparent and structured commission proceeding. It will allow parties to have consultants. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicole. Joe.
Sorry. I guess it's kind of I'm a little confused, or I guess I could use some clarity. We have had a lot of discussions around cost effectiveness inputs, what our assumptions are going to be, what the discount rates are going to be, what the non-energy benefits are going to be, blah, blah, blah. I think covering most of those, kind of fundamental assumptions that would go into cost effectiveness. And that seems like one, that's a big part of a potential study is making those decisions. And so we're a step ahead of a lot of places when they do a potential study, I think. So the rest of it seems like the majority of the questions for the potential study are around very technical things related to baseline efficiencies and what program eligibility definitions you're going to use, and that sort of thing. And that's where I'm a little confused, because I don't think the commission's going to want to talk about that. I think that's the kind of stuff that Dylan and I like to talk about. But it's just, I'm not sure that the commission will be able to deal with it in any sort of real way. And so it kind of feels like, so then if that's not, I think I'm hearing y'all agree, then those technical issues, those details are not part of what you're proposing. So then what you're proposing is to say, okay, well, we agreed all these inputs that are going into the cost effectiveness, but now after we see the potential study result, we're going to go to the commission and we'll decide then whether we still agree with all those assumptions that went in to it. I don't understand where that goes. I thought that's what we've been doing, and I thought that's what the future programming work group was. Its mission and scope were to kind of make a lot of those decisions and get ahead of this. Because we all know the timing. I think it's more urgent than I'm hearing in people's voices. We're already getting, the utilities are asking for assumptions related to, technical baselines and stuff, like, how we're going to evaluate stuff now or they want it, by the beginning of 2023 for their program plans. And so that's a pretty aggressive timeline.
Got a few hands up. Why don't we go Jim and Dylan, Whoever wants to respond there, and then Taylor.
Please go ahead, Dylan.
Okay. So Joe, I think I'm not sure what this misconnect is. We're not talking about a technical exercise. We're talking about really the policy elements of goal setting, and the potential for other sources of evidence besides the potential study. And those are things that the commission should have an opportunity to weigh, hear from parties, and make a decision to give the utilities direction on what goals they should design their plans around. And I think that, the potential study, for example, one of the things that potential studies do, and we're successful in getting a couple of different scenarios a little bit more fleshed out than what they often are in some potential studies. But as you're aware, one of the things the potential studies do is decide what is achievable. That's the magic industry word. What is achievable? And it's after you figure out what's cost effective. And I strongly agree with you. I think that a lot of the work that's been done really does help put us in good position, and AG in this study process in good position to determine what is cost effective or what is economic. But what is achievable is much softer evaluation. And in fact, I think the study is going to result in multiple scenarios about what is achievable, including what is achievable if you take the state's greenhouse gas policy goals as a given and you try to achieve those. So I think even the study results themselves will require the commission to make some policy judgments that are not technical about the level of effort and the funding implications, and sort of make decisions based on that. So that's the kind of proceeding that I'm thinking about here. It's not a technical unpacking of what is cost effective.
Can I just respond before Taylor? I see that makes sense to me, Dylan. So going beyond these other assumptions, I think that in the technical, everyone will try to wind that down and sort that out before these hearings. So then the commission is ultimately making a budget decision. It's making how much money it's willing to commit to a surcharge or ratepayers or whatever. And along with that's
a big part. I mean, just a big part of it. It's not I don't think it's the only way of thinking about that decision, but of course it's a big component.
And it's a budget decision, but it's also how much to expect the utilities to achieve within the parameters of the budget that they establish. And those are big questions. So I put a question in the chat. I sort of feel like we're having this one conversation about the potential study and whether how meaningful that's going to be, and so forth, which is an important discussion. But then there's I think the question that Dylan and OPC have raised, and that I also did in our comments, is so what is the commission supposed to do with that? If this potential study, let's say the potential study's done and everything's really good, it's a great job, and this gets filed with the commission, here's the potential study, set some goals. What are they supposed to do? And I think that's what we're talking about. The potential study may be great. It may be really deficient in some parties' views. We don't know. But what are they how's the commission then supposed to take that information and establish goals? Is that enough information? I think my position is it's probably not enough information. So it'd be very open to hear if there are other suggestions, or if the utilities maybe haven't had a chance to think about this yet, but how do you think they should set goals? Thank you.
All right. Taylor, there's a lot there. If you've had your hand up for a while, so I appreciate it.
And I've been taking notes. Jim, we hear you. I definitely think that is something that we need to probably take back and discuss. But what I kind of want to refocus us back to is, to some extent, I don't want to say we've already worked out these issues, but the consensus document that we all put together, and like it was OPC, the utilities, MEA, staff, we worked through these questions to some extent and came to consensus positions. We established what the thoughts were going to be on how the basis of goal setting, and I referenced it a little bit earlier. I mean, we put together the measurement of goals. We put together a straw on what the goal structure would look like. We put together the resource channels. And then we listed the areas of consensus and the areas of non-consensus. So I think those areas of we had the areas of non-consensus, and then we had the areas for continuing discussion and negotiation. And I think that we particularly and purposefully put that document together so that we'd move this discussion along within this working group, which was charged to discuss this. And from there, that really informs the discussion. So, what we said is that the goal setting will be informed by this potential study, and then any other information deemed relevant by the commission. So to that extent, I think that some of these issues, I don't want to rehash this document that we worked so hard to put together, and that should serve as a guideline for how the discussions may go. So understanding that those areas where we have continued negotiation or need more discussion, those are distinct areas. And I think that we should be continuing that discussion and not, foreclose any of those points, as well as those areas of non-consensus. We all recognize we have different positions on those areas, and we just agreed to disagree there. But I would just want to make sure that it's clear to the group that we did a lot of this work before.
Hey, Taylor, before you jump off,
Sure.
One of the things you were saying was it's a potential study plus other evidence or factors that the commission could study. I think my understanding of what Jim and Dylan wanted, like, how does the commission consider those other factors and other evidence? How does that information get put in front of them?
Yeah, so, and that's one of the things that I think that may be one of those continuing areas of discussion. But because we're in this future programming work group and we're like a month out from the report, I get that we're trying to get some level of just like what we can guide the commission on. So, we're going to submit the potential study. If anyone else wants to submit other potential studies or other information to the commission, we're all parties to the Empower case to whatever extent. I mean, don't get me here on the civil procedure of it all. But I would suggest, and I think that's where I hope you're hearing from the utilities. We're certainly available to and want to discuss, I guess, that procedure of getting that information in front of the commission. But I don't want us to start opening up and rehashing kind of those points that we've already put to bed.
All right. Thank you, ma'am.
Sure.
Dan and then Jim. Or Jim, you're already unmuted. You want to just jump in?
Thanks. I just wanted to respond. I'm certainly not suggesting, and I won't speak for OPC, but I suspect that they're not suggesting reopening any of those agreements that we put a lot of work into before. But Taylor, I don't recall that you were part of those conversations of that small work group that arrived at that goals framework, and I apologize if you were, and I forgot. But I would be really surprised if anybody who participated in that discussion thought that we, in that process, dealt with the issue of how big the goals should be. I think we were all really clear, we're kicking this down the road and we're going to deal with it later, and we haven't. So I think, certainly from my perspective, we're suggesting a way to deal with that. The report, as you've noted, is due in 5 or 6 weeks now. I don't think within the work group we're going to achieve any kind of consensus about what those goals should be, and especially because we don't have the potential study yet. So we're just trying to look at how can we be more explicit about reflecting all this information. It's no suggestion to revisit or reopen any of those previous discussions.
Does that help at all, Taylor?
I'm processing and thinking.
It's okay. I'll come back to you.
Yeah.
Dan, you had your hand up a while ago.
Yes, thank you. Dan Hurley with the commission staff. Just thinking about this, process moving forward, I guess obviously we're looking at the OPC recommendation here is looking at a specific goal. We're moving beyond the agreed upon structure. And I question for OPC or Nicole, Dylan, are you seeing this as we kind of go our separate ways and do our own thing and submit something to the commission? Or do you envision this work group continuing to meet and trying to hash out agreement?
Nicole, I'll let you gather any thoughts you have. Do you mean this work group, Dan, the future programming work group?
This work group or any work group that might be tasked with, I mean, I imagine it could still be this work group is tasked with developing the specific goals within the structure we already agreed upon.
That's a good question. I don't think that's something OPC's sort of deliberated about. I do agree with Taylor and Jim that the potential study itself and sort of staffing that and supporting that and making it as strong as can be is a big job. And so I think that's probably where a lot of our collective efforts, which should go in the coming months. Whether that could be done in parallel or not, I guess I think that we should see what those results are, and I think OPC and others can think about what other kinds of evidence they want, or there could be some kind of settlement that happens as part of that process. But I guess as I'm talking, I don't think it would be super fruitful to have a goal setting work group operating in parallel to the potential study, because I just think we should make that work and then see what the results are. So maybe I kind of answered your question in the end.
Go ahead, Dan.
Sure. I know from 7-8 years ago when we came up with the 2% goal, we kind of had a work group process moving, but it eventually came to be that the parties submitted their own recommendations to the commission. The commission made an ultimate decision on the 2% goal. It turned down at that point the 1% limited income goal. It turned down a natural gas goal at that point. And so here we are still talking about limited income goals that haven't occurred yet. But I know that's a different day, a different story for a different day. So yeah, I appreciate that. I realize that we probably need to see the potential study, but we also need to think about what that other pieces of evidence are going to be as we move forward. And I think at least maybe initially try to work through it as a group before we kind of, and we might just say they had a hard deadline saying, okay, we've hit September 15th for just for a number, and we're nowhere near any kind of consensus. So let's just file, go file by middle October what you think the goal structure should be. That could hopefully be where we wind up.
Thanks, Dan. Nicole.
Yes, Nicole Zeichner on behalf of OPC. I think it's always productive to try to reach a consensus if possible, and we haven't discussed this yet with OPC within our office, but I do wonder about the time frame, as you said, Dan, because if we need the results to really begin to reach the consensus, and that would be running almost parallel to the commission proceeding. So I'll think about this further and we can discuss this in our office, but that might be my initial thought, the timing.
Right. And I guess one more thing is I guess we should probably think about what other evidence outside of the potential study we should be bringing forward to the group as well.
Dan and Nicole, you guys are talking about timing. What would be like the, I guess, absolute, last, or the deadline to get this information to the commission before they can make a decision?
So I think I strongly agree that this is a timing question, and that if there wasn't a sort of need to develop the next program plan, by the following summer, then you could take 6 months of work group consensus building process, and then you ultimately need to have the commission as an out. I think it depends, Your Honor, a little bit on what the utilities planning cycle is going to look like. And I know because this is a greenhouse gas based, program plan, that they probably want more time than they have necessarily used in the last cycle or two. And so I think the commission needs, I'm kind of interested to hear from the utilities, but I think the commission needs to give the utilities that direction about the goals by the end of the calendar year. That's my sense. So I don't, others here know, when do you need to make sure that the commission has everything they need to make that decision? I don't, you can work back from there, but it's a fairly constrained time frame. So that's kind of my thinking.
All right. Yeah, I was just wondering, like, what would be the absolute longest we could wait, assuming the commission, buys off on this. Taylor, did you want to weigh in?
Yeah, so I think I do agree with the group. The commission, we need to understand more of like the commission's timeline, I guess. And I'm hoping that like sometime today we'll have more information as far, we have like a skeleton timeline right now from AEG, but we went back to them to confirm some things and hoping to have that like today. Because I mean, we also have to be mindful of what their timeline is, and all the stakeholders, we're pretty, you guys are pretty much aware of what we're working on with that. Like I said, we've said that we're hoping to have a final report able to go to the commission by the beginning of November. That's what we're hoping for. I mean, I think that's almost like the drop dead date for some sort of final. That's, I'm going to caveat that with subject to and notwithstanding other information that I may receive. But, our goal was to have this study kind of finalized by the end of the year. I don't know if that helps anyone in terms of thinking of this timing.
Well, so, Taylor, at the last stakeholder meeting, there was some discussion, it was obviously preliminary, of not bifurcating, but having some results available sort of ahead of like final report. And I heard from AG, it might make it easier to get some general results of the study that's not in the form of a final report that could start at least parties understanding what the potential is looking like. I think that would probably be useful. I mean, I think if there's no results available until November, that is going to push on the other side of it, which is when do the utilities get to start really doing their program planning. And so.
Yeah, that's kind of what I want to check on. I don't have that with me right now, and I don't want to misspeak.
The other quick comment that OPC made in the written comments that I think is worth noting is that the proposed outcome of this proceeding was, we called it goal setting, but I think acknowledged that it may be preliminary goal setting that is sort of direction to the utilities. Please design your plans for these goals. But that when the commission actually received the program plans and all the budgets, and there would, of course, the commission can always revisit its decisions, but that might need to make adjustments to the goals, or that it wouldn't necessarily be a final written in stone to the 10th decimal point. These are what the greenhouse gas goals are, but it is at least providing a fairly clear direction to the utilities as they develop their plans. Please develop your plans to achieve these goals. We're obviously going to review and make decisions on approving those the following summer and fall of 2023. So that's I think the conception, which also makes it a little bit easier for the commission to do that in a couple of months if it doesn't feel like needs to make the very final decision on what those goals are. I think that's easier to do in a 3-month process at the commission.
Thanks, Dylan. And Taylor, if you could get back to us on your program planning, when you think that will probably have to start, just so if the commission were to undertake some kind of proceeding, we could schedule that or give them a deadline as to when a decision would have to be made on that.
Yeah, I can certainly circle back up and get back to the group.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it. All right. Anybody else want to weigh in on this issue? Jim, I know you had the same or very similar proposal in your comments. Did you want to hit on anything that we may have missed, or are you satisfied with so far? I mean,
Well,
you're not satisfied, but I mean, I just want to make sure your voice has been heard.
I've definitely been heard on these issues. There were a couple others that I raised in our comments that I think I don't know what the answer is to, and I'm not sure how we get to an answer.
Right.
And
yeah. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
So, of course, thank you. And Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. And those are whether, I mean, I think we've had some conversation about an equity target, and we've, I think, mostly defaulted to it's a limited income target. That's how we're going to define equity. But I'm not sure that there was any sort of real conclusion or consensus around that. I feel like that's where the momentum is going. But I think that it may continue to be appropriate to think about other ways of thinking about. Sorry, did I step on your toes, OPC? I'm sorry. Other ways of thinking about what qualifies or what constitutes an equity target. Who are the people that we're trying to ensure receive benefits from Empower that might not otherwise, and whether income is the only criterion. I've seen some discussion recently about environmental justice issues and the White House's proposed approach to addressing environmental justice, and they didn't talk about race, is my understanding, and their feeling is that income is going to be a good proxy for reaching communities who've been harmed in an environmental justice context. And some voices have come out and said, actually, the correlation between race and environmental harms is much stronger than the correlation between income and environmental harm. So I'm not proposing an answer here. I'm just saying I'm not sure that we've concluded that conversation. I know when the utilities speak about their issues that haven't been resolved, they're going to talk about limited income and how that goal is framed. That was not specified in the framework. And certainly I'm in agreement with OPC that it should be a greenhouse gas goal. But that aside, what is the mechanism for clearly defining accountability for low income or equity goal, what the utility is responsible and what DHCD is responsible for, to make sure that there isn't poaching of customers and savings or confusion in the market or any of the bad things that can happen. And the last point that I wanted to raise, which I've raised before, is the default approach, the historic approach has been the limited income customers who reside within the utility territory or are served by a utility are treated within the funding mechanism surcharge related to that utility. And I continue to be concerned, but don't have the data yet, but it's possible that Cadmus can help us sort this out. If there are some utilities that have a much higher percentage of limited income equity eligible customers than others, could that result in either larger surcharge impacts on those limited income customers because that utility has to serve more of them, or in order to mitigate that surcharge impact, does the utility reach fewer of those eligible customers. And again, I don't have the answer for that today, but I think it's worth discussing. Is there a situation where it would make sense to consider a statewide or at least empower-wide limited income program to make sure that those perverse things don't happen? And with apologies to OPC for stepping on their toes before they were finished.
No, I'm teasing you, sir. No, you're fine. I was going to hit the greenhouse gas and then move on, but this is fine, sir. All right. Anybody want to respond to Jim's 3 points? Or a couple questions and a point?
Judge, this is Scott Bobby. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir.
Hi, good morning. I'm in the car, so if the sound quality is poor, I apologize. So Scott Bobby, DHCD. To Jim's question regarding kind of that proportion of low-income customers to standard rate customers, for lack of a better word, we are checking with Cadmus on that. They think they can find information out of the data that they collected for the study that they had done. So, and I'm not sure if Cadmus is on the call. Again, I'm on my phone, so I can't see who's there. So they can speak up a little bit if they're on board. So they'll be working on that, and hopefully we can have some information to help educate, I guess, that question and what the outcome may be for there. But the other thing I wanted to talk about, or maybe ponder, was the idea of doing a greenhouse gas goal low income, and whether that's the right way to go, or whether savings is the way to go. And I know we've had this conversation a little bit before, but it seems as though Jim or the advocates and OKC are heading more towards using, identifying greenhouse gas as being the goal. And I guess my only concern there is whether that's the right way to go or not. And I don't know the answer, but I've heard Cadmus indicate to us that greenhouse gas is probably not the right metric for a low-income program. And I heard of a study recently, done out in Colorado, where they did fuel switching. And anybody can correct me if I'm wrong. They did fuel switching, and they brought in heat pumps, and it actually increased the cost to heat the home by like 80%. And so, depending on what our goal is and what the purpose of low income is, I don't think our goal is to increase the cost of services to the customer on the low income side. And it's definitely a rough balance between greenhouse gas, which is the way the state is, leaning towards, reducing greenhouse gas emissions, which is certainly the right thing to do. But with our limited income population, we want to do that at the cost of the low income population. And so, if I heard Nicole correctly, one of her statements was we don't want the low income community to miss out, so we want to go with greenhouse gas emissions. Nicole, can you explain a little bit, what your thinking is of what the low income community would miss out on if we use a goal other than greenhouse gas emissions?
Yes, Nicole Zeichner on behalf of OPC. So our concern is, we know that the Maryland Commission for Climate Change has their buildings transition plan, and we know that the goal is residential electrification, and they also recommend that low-income households be retrofitted by 2030 for that. Now, obviously, there's not much time to do that, but our concern is that as more people switch to electrification, low-income consumers and ratepayers will be left on the gas system, and costs will increase for them. And we feel that if we're not moving low-income ratepayers in the direction of the state and what everyone else is doing, they'll be stuck with these costs. So that's our concern. And I understand we certainly don't want to raise costs for low-income ratepayers either. And I understand what you're saying completely, but our fear was that we don't want to exclude them from this transition, which is inevitable. It's inevitable because of climate change. So that's our concern.
So if you leave them on the system, the cost could increase, but if you also
So costs may go up anyway, but if we can get them on sooner, then the impact may be much less. Is that kind of an accurate characterization?
The thought is that I guess, yes, I would say yes. And it's going to take time. It's going to take time. If the recommendation is everyone should be retrofitted by 2030, I mean, obviously there was concern about the impact if that was not to occur, because we set a very tight deadline for that. So yes, the fear is that this transition needs to begin. And if we don't begin this transition as higher income individuals move to electrification, the cost of gas will increase and low income consumers will be left behind paying increased gas costs without retrofits, without the ability to move towards electrification like everyone else. That's the general concern that we have.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
You have anything else, Scott?
No, I'm good at this point. Thank you.
All right, thank you. Jim and then Dylan.
Thank you, Jim Gravatt, on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocate. Scott, thank you very much for reaching out to Cadmus about those data. I think that could be super helpful. Maybe it's a non-issue and we don't have to talk about it. That would be great, but I'm still concerned. So let's find out. Also, to your question, I'm going to echo and agree with what OPC said. Thank you, Nicole. That's right. We should be looking at long-term costs, but I very much don't want to increase costs for low-income customers in the short term either. And one of the things that I think we could, or the commission could look at are things like percent of income payment plans or other ways to structure rates for low-income customers. There are jurisdictions that have low-income rates. Other ways to do that on the electric system to ensure that their costs are not going to go up if they are switched to electrification, if they're electrified, if they're switched to electricity, you know what I'm saying. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Dylan, you're up.
Okay, thank you, Your Honor. Just adding a little bit to this as well. I mean, Nicole, I think, did a really good job summarizing the broader concern that motivates thinking about this in terms of greenhouse gases. As OPC said in the comments, we don't want to lose track of energy savings and bill savings, and we need to keep those in sights, even if the overall goal is a greenhouse gas goal. The other thing I would say, and I think, Scott, your question and your concern is absolutely valid, and I think part of the solution to what, in addition to ideas Jim's suggesting, is you really need to think carefully about who, on a household by household basis and a sort of building segment by building segment, who's ready to move to electrification in a way that's going to be economic. And some homes are going to be winners right out of the gate. Other types of buildings, the technology is still developing. Certainly there are opportunities for heat pumps in multifamily buildings, but that remains challenging economically for some buildings. And so I think part of the answer is still set your eyes on GHG, as OPC suggests, but be deliberative and mindful about that and sequence and target households and communities and types of buildings in a way that gets those ones that are really the most economic right away, and also allow markets and technologies to be developing at the same time. It's kind of more of a programmatic strategy level.
And so programmatically too, thank you, Jim and Dylan. So programmatically too, and looking at the program going forward, I don't recall where we stand with the potential for introducing solar into Empower. Because introducing solar to Empower and allowing solar to be put on, some of these homes, the homes that are I'll say acceptable, to receiving solar, without other additional expenses and, location and so forth. Adding solar, to the program, maybe just the low income program, would actually help to offset some of those increased costs that they may incur. Because, one of the things that we hear occasionally, even now where we're working on doing measures that are cost effective, that are supposed to provide a lower utility bill, sometimes it ends up being higher. And sometimes it's higher because of, the characteristics of the home, but oftentimes it's because of just the way people, operate the home after it's been weatherized. But introducing solar into this kind of electrification process and saving, GHGs, it may be a way to actually achieve the GHG savings and then also reduce their costs. So that's just a thought.
Your Honor, if I could just respond quickly to say, I totally agree, Scott, on the economics. I think that's absolutely the case. It's a tool that can really help address that problem. So you're definitely right on that. In terms of, did this group resolve that question? I don't recall, but I don't think we did. So it is complex for sure in terms of whether or not to do that in Empower, but I can't disagree with your point that it does help the economics of a retrofit, electrification retrofit, to be able to add solar.
I recall someone way back when, they had some kind of proposal for low income and solar. But that was months ago. And I think it was just more or less a proposal. We didn't really adopt it or comment on it too often. All right. Emily just posted something. Federal Weatherization Assistance Program is also moving in the direction of allowing electrification and solar to be included in projects. So for what that's worth. All right. Yes, Dan.
Yeah, just one more thing to add. I guess with all the potential federal dollars coming in, I guess we got to make sure we're leveraging all resources. So keep the impact of the Empower surcharge down. And solar and Empower has not been traditionally allowed. I guess it's kind of tricky depending on the company and ownership and things like that. I mean, I know I get flyers in my neighborhood all the time about, hey, we'll put the panels on your roof for free and we'll just charge you a rate for the next 25 years. So, there's no cost down. So I guess a limited income customer could get that. And I'm not sure where an Empower incentive could help with that. I mean, obviously, if it's owning the panels and making that big investment up front, there's those issues. And of course, we do have the community solar pilot that has a definitely limited income carve out. It's really for customers who aren't in in the appropriate structures that can handle solar or could be apartment buildings, and they can access the community solar through at least this pilot at this time. Thanks, Chuck.
Thank you, sir. Go ahead, Scott.
With the solar stuff, I would be more preferable to, the owner, the occupant, the building owner, actually owning the system, whether it's Empower or federal funds or combination thereof. DOE has always allowed solar to be a part of a project. It was just such a limited dollar value that it just never got done. And I think they've raised that over the years, and I think it's finally getting to a point where it's somewhat viable. I think the challenge with utilizing, a source other than owning it yourself, they're subject to the solar owners' increases in fees. And as long as the utility fees continue to go up, the production fee that the occupant would be paying probably still be beneficial. But if utility rates go down, then they're actually paying more using the solar than if they own the system themselves. And at least if they own the system themselves, they're not paying, any extra fee, and so therefore it actually is much cheaper for them if it's subsidized. And that is the key, is subsidizing that system for the occupant. That's really the only way to almost guarantee that their utility agreement would stay low. So just trying to throw that out there too.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else want to weigh in on that issue or any of the issues Mr. Gravatt raised? All right, Nicole, did we kind of address your second point on the low income, or did I just want to make sure before we move on?
Yes, Your Honor. And there is one, if I could just mention one additional point
Please.
about that. Thank you. So we do believe that the utilities should also have a goal for the LMI households. And we do think there are things that utilities can do. We understand that DHCD runs the program, and DHCD is doing a good job with those programs. And there are some things that they obviously can do better than the utilities. But we feel that there are also things that the utilities can do. The utilities in their comments stated that some of their programs have good opportunities for limited to moderate income household participation. For example, QHAC and appliance recycling. We also think that behavior and demand response programs are programs that only utilities can offer that could be benefiting a high proportion of LMI customers. And additionally, utilities could engage in outreach and targeting of communities in need. So if they, for example, if they locate a certain area where there are a lot of turnoffs or certain areas where they feel like there's a need for additional assistance, they have the data, they have the ability to target those areas with energy savings assistance or energy efficiency assistance. And we also think maybe home retrofits, utilities are able to do some things there, appliance recycling, a connected thermostat, or a heat pump water heater. And then DHCD works on insulation, air sealing, any appliance or HVAC measures that they have funds for. So that's why we believe that there should also be a goal for the utilities in addition to DHCD with LMI programs. Thank
Thanks.
you. That's the only other thing.
Thank you, ma'am. Any response to that? Everybody loves it. Utilities.
I'll take the bait. So I mean, I don't really have a position on whether there should be a goal for the utilities or not on the low income side. The advocates have said it, Jim said it, and even if you said it, utilities said it, and the HCD has said, we don't want to have things that, I think it was either Jim or Dylan said, we don't want anybody poaching other customers, to the advantage of the program. I think really what we should be looking at going forward is there are certainly things that the utilities can do that DHCD can't do. They have programs that are reaching out to food banks. They have the behavioral programs. Those are just things that DHCD is not going to replicate. But there are things, there are things like QTech programs that do cross over into the work that DHCD does. And I actually think going forward, we need to coordinate the design better, and maybe DHCD is doing more of these QTech type activities, for limited income. Realistically, we shouldn't have to, because they're generally full building. They're intended to be full building programs. But just having better coordination, and we've been working with the utilities for years on this, and we're getting better with it. But having better coordination so that if a utility contractor is, interviewing a potential customer for a QHEC, find out if it's an affordable housing project, or find out if it's a limited income family. And if it is, it's immediately transferred to DHCD, and they're not trying to go after a project like that. So I think we want to try to set up methods so that utilities are focusing on those things, those things that they're good at, and DHCD is focusing on those things that DHCD is good at, and then focusing on guidelines to help utilities and DHCD determine when a project should not fall under their realm and fall, be transferred or referred over to, the other entity. So again, no position on whether utilities should have a goal. I think just more, better communication and just make clear and the plans and what they will be doing will make clear, what their goal is, but having, something in place that really helps to minimize, some of that, it's really unintended poaching. But when it does happen, it does impact the programs, that GCD is trying to do as a whole building program. We want to minimize that so that the customer is getting as much as possible. So that was the hook of the bait that I took.
All right, thanks, Scott. Taylor and then Nicola.
Thank you, Scott. And I will say, I hope I'm not repeating something that you may have said. You were going in and out for me a little bit there, but the utilities would support an LMI goal, and that support is reflected in that consensus document that I've been waving around all day. So we, to the extent that it's in that consensus document, we support that. But I would just say we want to make sure that it would be the utility's position that goal would be based on spend and not benefits. That's kind of where we would land on that. So hopefully I didn't just repeat something that Scott said, but I'll just chime in there. And if anyone else from utilities wants to speak up, please do.
Taylor, are you, he had also mentioned kind of better coordination between, sounds like the utilities and DHCD, so you're not unintentionally poaching a low-income customer. Is that something the utilities would support, or?
I think so. I would want to check with my group, but my gut tells me I don't think that that's a problem, but I will check with the group.
Excellent. Thank you. All right. Nicola.
I just wanted to add that, this is a little bit of a chicken and egg situation. I think we do need to be a little bit clear about what kind of programs would be DHCD's responsibility and what would be the utilities in order to set the goal, so that the goal is not set in a way that the only way the utilities can reach it is by, tapping into the customers that we typically service to that extent. So I feel like, what do we do first, setting the goal or knowing what each party's responsibilities is?
Thank you, ma'am.
I'll just say, I do think that's a good point that Nicola just made. And I do want to just add kind of maybe ancillary to that, we would want those goals that would be reflected or imposed on the utility to reflect the fact that DHC also would be implementing their programs, which we obviously work hard not to overstep or step on each other's toes with. But recognizing that if we go forward with this, recognizing that there's now 2 entities working in this LMI space and the goals reflect that.
Seems like it makes sense. Scott, you were going to chime in there, sir?
I was going to chime in on Taylor's comment about going back to repeat about coordination, and I just wanted to reiterate that the communication that we've had with all of the utilities over the last 3 or 4 years is exponentially better than it's been, in prior cycles. And so I didn't want to in any way relay that they're not communicating. There's a lot of open communication and there's a lot of coordination that goes on. I just think when we're actually designing the programs, we need more of that so that the design from the beginning has that opening and we can get it right from the beginning instead of trying to figure it out after the designs have already happened.
All right. Gotcha, Scott. Appreciate that clarification. All right. Anybody else on OPC's position? All right. Thank you, Nicole. Thanks, Dylan.
Thank you.
That leads us to, and Taylor, you kind of already touched on the utilities that you want a an LMI goal based on spend, not benefits. Did you want to add anything to that, or?
I am
That's
not.
it in a nutshell.
Yeah, that's kind of the high level in the nutshell position. I'm not an SME on spend and all of that, but that is the high level suggestion. If there's anyone who wants to kind of elaborate on that, feel free. But if you would like me to provide more elaboration, I would have to go back to my group and come back.
No, I'm just picking on you because you've been talking so much this morning. So I didn't know if you wanted to lay anything out more, but all right, Dylan, you have a question. Dylan's got a question.
Well, I didn't mean to cut Taylor or you off, Your Honor, but if you want to just go to questions, I have 2 questions.
Well, 1 second before I get to you. Becca, did you want to say something? I saw you unmuted your mic.
Yes, this is Becca Harder, Potomac Edison. I was going to speak to utility comments. If this is the right place to do that, I can go ahead and jump in here.
Please
Okay,
do.
great. Okay, like I said, Becca Harder, Potomac Edison. Utilities circulated our comments yesterday just to address the utility stance on the limited to moderate income goals and coordination. The comments we circulated, they're consistent with what we verbally discussed on this topic in previous working group meetings. We just wanted to lay it out there for clarity. So we recognize that making sure all the customers have access and opportunity to participate and benefit from the Empower programs is important. And delivering equitable programs includes giving the extra attention to LMI customers who don't necessarily have the financial means to participate in all the Empower programs. Utilities believe
Becca,
that yes.
You kind of broke up there for a minute. I was wondering if you might be able to just kind of go back maybe like 5 or 10 seconds, whatever you were talking about. You're kind of in and out a little bit. Thank you.
Sorry about that. That's why I'm staying off camera. But utilities just recognize that making sure all customers have access and opportunity to participate and benefit from Empower programs is important. So delivering those equitable programs, it includes giving this extra effort to LMI customers who might not have the means to participate in all the Empower programs. All right, just checking in. Can you hear fine now?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, great. So the utilities believe any limited income goal structure, it needs to promote both DHCD and utility coordination and collaboration, so not competition. We've heard these words already in this discussion thus far, but it needs to recognize the utilities and DHCD each have unique roles, but it also provides flexibility. So this will allow the utilities to design portfolios which can coordinate with DHCD and reflect our unique service territories and the demographics in each utility. Would also give us a chance to adapt the portfolios over time and respond to market changes or any policy changes that happen along the way. So the utilities, we're looking at endorsing a target that establishes a % of our total budget be directed towards LMI customers, and that any utility LMI goal should be structured as a % of budget. The reason that we're looking at that % of budget is it encourages coordination and collaboration with DHCD, which currently, they have the best opportunity at targeting those large per participant and comprehensive savings opportunities since they have the traditional limited income programs. But the main reason is we're trying to avoid being in direct competition with DHCD for those savings or GHG reductions. The utilities LMI offerings, they should complement what DHCD's efforts are doing by targeting participation through our general residential programs and supplemental offerings, such as like the outreach and education. And that could include information targeted towards the DHCD programs, just helping promote participation in Empower without bias between utilities or DHCD. So the proposed structure best supports the utility efforts to create the coordination that's needed in order to reach those LMI customers. So we've already mentioned a little bit about the GHG reduction target. Just with the move to that, it's not necessarily appropriate to require the utilities to achieve a target savings percentage for limited income customers based on unknown programs today. So a percent of spend is not necessarily appropriate as that goal. It turns into a moving target throughout the cycle. Utilities implement the program, spends money, that fluctuates throughout the cycle. If you do the percent of budget, then that target is fixed and is known throughout the entire cycle. So just wrapping up, utilities want for Empower to be successful. I mean, that includes the participation of LMI customers. We've advocated for an LMI goal structure based on the percent of budget for the utilities, just to recognize the unique roles between DHCD and the utilities and how they play. We think it's the best way to promote the coordination and collaboration between us. And we think this structure will maximize the savings and GHG reduction opportunities for LMI customers. So that's where the utilities are today. Thanks, Your Honor, for letting me speak.
Oh, absolutely. Don't go anywhere yet. I know, Dylan, did you still have questions, sir?
I do.
Okay.
And thank you, Becca, for that summary. So can a couple of clarifications. Are you talking about one spending goal or two spending goals, one for DHCD and one for the utilities?
So I was looking at percent of budget instead of the percent of spend. The utility goal would be separate. So
okay, so a percentage of budget, percentage of overall budget for limited income, and that would be broken down in distinct spending that would happen by DHCD and distinct from the utilities. Is that what I'm getting?
Yeah, we just think that there should be clarity between, what is expected of DHCD and what is expected of the utilities, and that they should consider those expectations should consider each other as well.
Okay. Right. I think we've talked about that before. I think there's a lot of agreement that and the conversation, the comments by Scott and Nicola earlier, I think were really good. There needs to be clarity on these types of programs or these types of savings opportunities, so you're not getting overlap. Do you have a percentage in mind of budget?
The utilities haven't formulated a percentage. So at this time, no.
Do you have like a principle or a kind of a method or any ideas of how you would recommend setting a percentage? It's okay if you don't. I'm curious.
Yeah, I mean, I think just with a potential study in process, I think that would weigh into it. But as far as if there's the methodology specific, I don't think we're at a place right now to be able to bring one forward.
Okay. And are you, is it the case that, for the spending that was happening directly by the utilities, would you, as part of your program plan and application, would you estimate the savings that you would get from those budgets? Or would you not, or would you just say, we're going to spend this much money and we just don't know? You mentioned some uncertainty, or do you try to estimate, as I think you sort of normally do in your plans, what the savings are from different programs?
Yeah, I mean, I'm pausing here because, throughout my conversation, throughout my overview of where the utilities are, I mean, some of those funds could potentially go for outreach and education, supporting the DHCD programs. So, what that amount is at this point and what kind of savings we could get out of it, I'm not sure that we'd be able to easily portray those savings in a plan. I guess I'm still thinking through that. But I think, any projections would just be consistent with the filing and reporting templates that we've used thus far and that we would use going forward. I mean, I guess it just ultimately it depends on what initiatives the utilities would be doing.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. Right. So one more sort of question or comment. So that you spoke to this in the comments. It says, the utilities LMI offerings should complement DHCD efforts. And I guess this maybe isn't a fair question to ask you, but I guess the key question that I think is important to OPC is what is the structure of accountability for the utilities to do that? It's a lovely idea. We want you to do it. I'm sure you want to do it. Scott, mentioned things have gotten much better, but what is the sort of mechanism in terms of like accountability for the utilities offerings to complement DHCD efforts? What is that? What's the structure for that to kind of motivate or hold the utilities accountable for that?
I mean, I guess through, the filing and reporting process, feedback that we get from stakeholders in the commission. I mean, all that weighs into that. I mean, that's how we got to where we are today in the coordination that we currently have with DHCD. And it's both, with the utilities and with DHCD having separate goals. I mean, it's in our best interest to coordinate anyways. So that would help our programs be successful, both DHCD's programs and the utilities programs, that coordination. So that's a driver. So
let me just follow on that a little bit. Why is it in your best interest? If you have a spending goal and the commission sort of approves, Potomac Edison should spend this much. Why is it in your best interest to coordinate with DHCD?
I mean, for our programs just to be, I'm pausing as I'm thinking through this, so give me a sec.
And I, Becca, I don't mean to be like prosecutorial or because I'm not a lawyer, so I'm probably not very good at it. I'm asking this also for other people. Like, what is the sort of I think accountability is really a part of goals. And I mean, it's just sort of a part of the function of goals is to give the commission and others and the utilities sort of the metric to sort of be accountable. And I don't think we have all the answers, but I think there is sort of some sort of concern about if you set the bar, like spend this much money, then that, not that that's easy. It's actually challenging to spend money, well, but if you don't have you can't estimate what the savings are. DHCD has a separate goal that is, they get to spend their money. Then I think it just raises healthy questions about how that.
I'm hearing your questions. Now I'll just go back to that with DHCD and the utilities having separate goals. It's in both our best interests to not compete for those savings. So for us to coordinate with DHCD, we're not only helping ourselves, but we're helping them out. So we aren't targeting those same customers. I mean, if we want to meet our goal, we have to coordinate.
Or you're not targeting those same customers with the same sort of offerings, because I think
and that's part of the coordination.
Yeah. I know I've sort of been monopolizing a little. I think that the issue of not competing with each other for the same savings, I think that's very important. It does require coordination. I'm not convinced that having a spending goal as opposed to a savings goal doesn't. You still have to not compete for the same customer and the same, appliance. I think either way. But I'll stop there if you want to respond to that or add, but I'll let others jump in if they want. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. I'm got a couple hands up. We got Jim, then Lori, and then Julia.
Thank you, Your Honor. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. Following up on Dylan's questions a little bit, and again, I just want to state, and as I have been for years in these Empower proceedings, very strong agreement for the idea that clear accountability between DHCD and the utilities needs to be established, whatever the program structures are. But I don't, unless there's no savings or benefits, measurable benefits associated with the spending, I don't see how that changes the picture between a spending goal and a greenhouse gas abatement goal. And if you can help me understand why it would be different, unless there's no savings associated with it. If it's just spending, then I can see how it would be different. But otherwise, I don't. Is there anything you can say to help me understand why it's different?
I'm sorry, Jim, help you understand what specifically is different?
Why a spending goal instead of a greenhouse gas abatement goal would be more effective at removing the possibility of competition between the utilities and DHCD, unless there's no requirement to get savings for the money that the utilities spend.
So the reason the utilities were looking at the percent of budget goal, and I should just clarify, the comments that we said, that was for utilities. That's not, we're not trying to say what goals should exist for DHCD. But if there were a savings goal and that was what the utilities were held to, then the utilities would not have the I don't want to say a wall, that's the wrong word, but we wouldn't have a disincentive to try to get savings from anywhere possible. DHCD, I mean, they have the main programs that give the greatest opportunity of savings to those LMI customers. What we're proposing and what we would propose would be for supplemental initiatives that complement what they have. Hopefully that helps.
It does help a bit, thank you. Do you think that there are other ways to protect the portfolio from trying to poach savings, trying to get savings from the same pool? And I'm thinking about things like specific program areas. The utilities do promotion, I know this is, I'm out of time year-wise and standards-wise, but let's say it's still 2020. The utilities do retail lighting promotions at dollar stores in low-income communities. DHCD is not doing that. There's no real competition there. Could there be programs such as that, or that are designated for the utilities versus what is designated for DHCD that would help manage that risk of competition?
I mean, potentially, but I think that plays into, just having very clear objectives for both the utilities and DHCD.
Totally agree with that. They should be very clear objectives. The other thing, this is just an observation, but maybe you can speak to it. So on the one hand, we've got the utilities here for low income saying we should have a spending goal. And then we've got another proposal from the utilities saying we should earn a performance incentive for spending less. And I'm not sure how those reconcile. Is there anything you can help with on that point? I'm just thinking about how the commission is going to look at that. And some particular commissioners are going to say, wait, you want to get paid for spending less, and you just want a goal for spending that doesn't necessarily have an outcome tied to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think how the low-income programs or limited income programs have been treated thus far by not having to meet cost effectiveness tests. I mean, it just shows that there is a benefit to having those specific programs. So I feel like the limited income programs are something outside of that. But I mean, I'd have to, that's me just speaking off the cuff, not necessarily for all the utilities. So I'd have to have some of my utilities counterparts weigh in on that, I guess.
Sure. Well, thanks for that. Just in terms of how it's going to be received by the commission, it might be worth some more thought. And thanks for your answers. Appreciate it.
Thank you, sir. Lori.
All right. I'm hoping you can hear me. It's my first time in the office and I'm not fully set up yet. So,
Loud and clear.
All right. The first thing is why one of the reasons, and I know it's everybody is aware that the LMI community is often harder to reach than other communities, and the programs, specifically the utility programs, are often harder to have it really make them worthwhile for them, you know, the more expensive HVAC units and stuff like that. But what we're hoping to do, and very much in coordination with DHCD, is get good outreach, and outreach isn't free, and be able to communicate. And that communication would include whatever utility programs we might have, in addition to DHCD programs. So, you know, part of our outreach would include the fact that we would say, hey, if you want a robust home audit, and again, I'm not using very good marketing language, you know, go here. So we want to put some money into awareness, and awareness doesn't drive necessarily, at least immediately, results. But hopefully in the long run or in the medium run, the awareness drives results. So I think that's the first thing I wanted to say. And the second thing, and I'm also working on one laptop screen, so I apologize, I have to toggle around here, is we had really near consensus on LMI reporting items, as well as metrics, as well as some other things like rent versus own, which are not necessarily LMI. And the first thing we said is the utilities and DHCD will report GHG abatement associated with LMI programs and measures based on whatever it is that we decide that conversion factor is. So we're going to be doing a lot of reporting. We're going to report on GHG abatement. We're going to, that'll be a metric. We're going to have a metric on rent versus owned. We're going to look at geographic distribution. We're going to at least discuss, but not really have a metric, or if OPC's suggestion it's a metric, impact on arrearages and disconnects. We're going to look at home energy burden. So we're not trying to come out of this scot-free. We're not trying to come out of this saying, we're just going to spend money and la, la, la. It's just that we're aware that it's a different conversation, a different approach, finding the programs that resonate. If our customers all sign up for some phenomenal program through DHCD based on our communication with them, I'll be thrilled, even though the utility won't get, quote, credit for that savings. And I think that's the tightrope that we walk through when we have potentially two entities looking at the same customers. And again, some things are more distinct, as noted, power strips and light bulbs in dollar stores, but other things are more difficult. So if we can get the communication out there, and if DHCD, based on that communication, doubles their home audit programs and we don't have one limited income QHEC, I'm excited. That's a great outcome. But we don't have savings. So I think that's part of the concern that the utilities have, is with this segregation of responsibility, it gets a little harder. And if they get the best outcome somewhere else, that should be a good thing. With that, I'm done. Or ready for questions.
All right, thanks. Anybody have questions based on what Lori just said before we move on?
Surprisingly, I do.
Shocked.
Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. And Lori, I mean, I agree with all those things and good outcomes from that outreach. But gosh, based on sort of commission orders over the last couple of years, I thought you were all supposed to be doing all that now anyway. I mean, the commission has acknowledged in a number of orders.
Yes, and we do, but we can do more of it. We can, our primary focus is to reach our 2% goal. And then we have communication to help our customers who are limited income and can participate in DHCD programs. We certainly communicate that. However, given an opportunity, we could really do more and get more. outreach isn't, outreach is, there's I guess you can't see my hands. I could probably turn my camera on, but I don't know if you want to see
No, you
what's
don't have to. It's okay.
right now. It's a lot of boxes. It's a continuum, and also it's new. So now we also have to communicate to an audience that's harder to get to, and maybe an audience, I don't know, that is less familiar with greenhouse gas versus megawatt hours. We may have to have a different communication opportunity that may be more robust to reach that market. I don't know, because I don't know what it takes to communicate that kind of stuff.
Mhm. Okay, thanks.
I'm seeing a chat from Dylan.
Yeah, that's for you, Lori. What's the structure for accountability to ensure that those positive?
I think that goes back to the original metrics and goals that we set up, that we're going to have to, we agreed very much that we're going to report greenhouse gas savings. Even if it's not a goal, we're going to report it. We're going to report the rent versus own. We're going to look at percent of eligible household participation, home energy burden, the impact, whether it's a metric or reported, the impact on disconnects and arrearages. So all that information is there to be accountable for. Isn't that the whole point of why we spent 2.5 months or something like that coming to all but one item consensus on LMI? Is that's what keeps us accountable, even if it's not a goal.
All right, Lori, before I let you go, in the chat, Nicola also made a couple comments, wondering if you had any thoughts on it.
I say this is just a theory, not sure if that was the utilities thought. I apologize, because whenever that was typed, I wasn't paying attention.
No,
So
it was, if you go up a little bit, just the comment above, I can read it out for everyone's benefit.
Okay.
She stated, maybe if both parties have savings goals, both would try to go for the measures and programs that yield the highest savings. If it was a spending goal for the utilities, then they could focus on any program that they can do best, as long as their portfolio is still cost effective.
Trying to separate that out. The first paragraph, I find, we have to coordinate. So if both parties have savings goals, I think that's what Becca alluded to. I don't think we should be pushing our QHEC program at the expense of DHCD's, audit program. So it sort of concerns me if we really have to coordinate what our programs are to make sure. So the next thing is if it's just a spending goal. Well, again, I just think that there's accountability in that there are metrics that we have to report. And if we spend $1 million and say we got 3, greenhouse gas wasn't really abated, and we didn't get to any apartments, and we didn't do whatever else, that's what holds us accountable. So I think that we are being held accountable with the metrics, but that we can have more opportunity to spend an effort on education, and we know that these are higher cost customers to reach, so it gives us that opportunity to reach them.
All right.
And I would like to say, I've only been in this role for a little less than half, probably quite a little less than half of Empower Maryland, but the utilities have never. Our goal is to really provide savings, and we, at least for BGE, we often provide very cost-effective savings under budget. So to think that as we move to greenhouse gas abatement or some other structure, that, again, I can speak for everyone, but I know specifically for BGE, to think that we would try to do anything different is, I don't want to say offensive, but I find it disturbing that, that after all these years of providing really good programs and good savings, that these kinds of things are in question.
All right, before I let you go, and Julia, I'm just going to skip you just because we were just talking about Nicola. So I will come back to you. Nicola, you had your hand up, ma'am.
Yeah, and so that was just a theory before the utilities explained more where their thought was coming from. So I don't think we need to get back to that. I do want to give the utilities a lot of credit, and regarding to what Lori said too, that over the last couple of years they have demonstrated a lot of effort and interest and results in providing more limited income services and connecting those customers with us. And this was without them having a goal that they are held responsible for. They started reporting on some of these limited income metrics. The commission asked about it. They demonstrated their efforts and results in that arena, and they have been more than forthcoming and in coordinating with us and offering outreach opportunities, marketing campaigns to include our program. So I do want to give credit there where credit is due. And that has worked without goals so far. So if there are any goals, I don't want to say what they are or what they should be. I believe that the utilities would only increase that and not, revert back to anything else.
Thank you, ma'am. And I apologize. I wasn't trying to get anybody's, ruffle any feathers. I just wanted to make sure, you got the answer to your question. So, Julia, thanks for your patience.
Thank you, Your Honor. Julia Friedman with Oracle. So I have a couple reactions now, I think. One is we did some research towards the end of 2020 with broadly looking at US residential customers. And for those struggling to pay their bills, found that about 2/3 of customers have a preference for, their first group that they're going to look to for assistance is the utility. And so I think that just sort of grounds us in needing to figure out the role for the utility here, because they will be the primary group that a customer will look to for assistance. But then that said, I think a huge +1 to Lori's comment about, needing to have the tools in place to do outreach and education, just because we know it's a harder group to reach and a low level of awareness and a higher level of barriers to get to participation. Just in terms of when we think about the goal structure, I think it's important to think about how the goal structure will ultimately impact the customer experience. So limited income customers already face a very complex world of navigating program enrollment, right? There are a lot of programs offered by a lot of different agencies, different definitions of who's eligible, different applications, all of that. And so just wanted to, make the comment that making a very complex, adopting a complex goal structure, I think reporting metrics are different, but a complex goal structure may lead to even more complexity in the environment that a customer would have to navigate. And that we have found, and I think the utilities can probably attest to this, that maintaining that customer trust, so this gets at the question of why is coordination so important? Maintaining that customer trust is super important. And so if customers feel like they've spent time trying to apply to things and then they're rejected, the likelihood that they're going to come back and try again is low. Or you're marketing them to something that they've already been rejected for, or maybe they even were accepted for, but then they're like, why are you sending me this? The more groups that are not coordinated, the more likely that that will be a bad experience. And so again, just taking it back to a higher level, I think the way that goals are structured will have a pretty profound implication for how a customer ends up experiencing the offerings. And so simplicity here is definitely, I think, a friend to everybody. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. Dylan, your hand up, sir.
Yep. Thank you, Your Honor. Something that occurred to me listening to Julia talk about the sort of role of utilities and the importance of utilities and customer relationship. And Lori also spoke to, and others, one of the functions that's already happening and maybe can be magnified is for the utilities to use those assets to help DHCD achieve savings and reach customers. And I wanted to point out that one of the pieces of OPC's initial proposal around PIMS was to give the utilities have their limited income goal or their financial incentive structured the way that they do it in Hawaii, where the utilities don't run the programs, but they can help support them in the way I think Julie and others and Lori are talking about. And so the performance incentive would be based on DHCD sort of achieving and exceeding their savings goals. So you'd actually reward the utility for DHCD sort of excelling at savings, and that's a little bit toward this idea of how do we create some accountability, and this was a financial incentive. It wasn't meant to be a penalty or some punitive sort of goal structure, but it was a saying, okay, utilities, you're ready to help DHCD achieve greater savings by using your outreach tools, your customer relationships. Great. We will actually reward you financially for helping them do that. But we're going to measure it. We're going to set some goals and we're going to measure it. And so I know we're not talking primarily about cost recovery here, but in terms of having the utilities help DHCD achieve savings, I'm kind of curious if the utilities or anyone else thinks that is one way to kind of motivate. And Julie is asking about the metrics. Measuring it is good. Creating a goal or a financial incentive, I think there's evidence that those also have added value.
Anybody from the utilities want to respond to Dylan? Lori, Becca? All right.
I'll jump in.
Oh, please, go ahead.
So Scott, probably DHCD. So I like the principal idea of the utilities and DHCD. For the first two cycles, DHCD was ordered to be the sole implementer of programs, and it was pretty straight and clear who was responsible. And then, coming into the last cycle, I guess maybe this cycle, the commission kind of switched gears a little bit, and I think for the right interests, with advocates and for the stakeholders' interest in getting more benefits for low-income programs, the commission started saying, okay, the utilities need to do more. They need to step up and do more on the low-income side. But that caused a lot of problems, I'll say that loosely, because all of a sudden now, what used to be a very straight line, was responsible for what, it got really cloudy. And so anything that we can do to, draw that line and have that distinction of who's responsible for what, I think is really beneficial. And I think DHCD, yes, the world is what DHCD lives in, but the utilities are reaching everybody in the state, and DHCD doesn't necessarily have the know-how on how to do that. So I think the role the utilities play in supporting DHCD to get to the low-income customers is really huge. And as Nicholas said, and as I was saying earlier, we have much better information than we have in the past. But if they're actively, going forward, actively coordinating and promoting the programs. I think if that's the only thing they did, I think that would be, a huge benefit to them. So just want to put that out there.
All right, thanks, Scott. Anybody else want to weigh in on this issue? Oh, yeah, Nicole.
Yes, hi, Nicole Zeichner on behalf of OPC. It looks like, and I'm sure this is not a surprise, but we know the commission has asked in the past for greater, I guess, should we say cooperation? I'm not saying there's not cooperation, but if we look at the commission's order of December 20th, 2019, that's order number 89404, and pages 10 and 11 discuss limited income goals and programs. And the commission directed the parties to focus on increasing participation in the limited income programs. And it asked the work group at the time, the limited income work group, to consider, among other things, how to improve coordinating and expediting service delivery for limited income programs, how to increase the outreach and marketing of limited income programs, and how to increase participation, particularly in limited income programs that do not require direct customer investments. So I do think there's a lot that can be done with marketing, with outreach. I think that's almost quite a bit of the battle. I'm a former labor organizer, community organizer, and I tend to believe that if you show up at someone's door and you offer them solutions, and these are low cost or free solutions, people are generally going to want to take you up on that. So I think we shouldn't underestimate the value of outreach. I think the utilities have a pretty good role that they could play there in coordination with DHCD. And I think that I also just want to say, I think metrics and goals are two very different things. Metrics are important, but goals that's how people or entities are held accountable. Metrics don't have the teeth that goals have. And I'm not saying the utilities are not going to do this without goals, but I think this is a goal setting process, and we really should consider actual goals versus just reporting metrics. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right. Anybody else? Anybody from the utilities want to respond? Amy. Amy? Can't hear you. Doesn't look like you're muted. Is your volume up on your computer or your phone? Your screen's blank. Oh.
If you're on a phone too, you might have to hit *6 in order to unmute the phone outside of using the mute button.
Amy, we'll come back to you. Joe.
Yeah, I'm actually reluctant to even talk to this issue, but I've been around goals and different policies and processes for a long time, and I totally am down with accountability and providing goals and guidance that get you that accountability. But it's not. But there's different ways to get accountability. It seems like, the commission, having a commission, a regulatory body reviewing things, venues in which stakeholders can come speak to different issues and express concerns, whether it's midstream process, or whether it's the coordination between DHCD and the utilities, that it's not sometimes, in my opinion, it is a goal is not always necessary, and sometimes it's not even conducive to getting a good result. But it is a lot of work, which is good for me, right? I'm assuming I will be involved with some of some of these metrics and trying to gather data and make sure that they're robust, whatever the decisions are made. But it's I'm not just in my experience for many years as on the advocacy side. I'm not sure that you can kind of weight the whole process down to the point where it just stops things in its tracks, and people kind of throw up their hands and ignore everything because there's too much. And so at least in what I was hearing in the limited income work group that Lori led was an attempt to develop metrics that were informing of that process. And if you can develop a goal, great. but it seems like it's been a lot of years trying to figure out what a reasonable goal would be in this context, given the challenges with figuring out who's buying light bulbs or participating in QHEC. And so that's yeah, I don't really have skin in the game. I'm just an observation as a friend of the group.
Thanks, Joe. Maren.
Hi, thank you, Your Honor. This is Maren Mahoney on behalf of the Series Energy Optimization Work Group. I was actually involved in the Hawaii PIM development, and I recall that we had put together, there were some things that we had baseline data for PIMs, but then there were some things that we did not have the baseline data for. And so I recall the process being that we would develop some metrics, and then in a certain amount of time, that would translate into data that could be used to set an incentive. And so I guess because of my experience there, I kind of viewed our discussion on the LMI metric subgroup as a great groundwork for that kind of thing. So I don't know if anyone else feels like that's a possible pathway forward, but I just wanted to bring that up, that was my experience. And I think that could work here. Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am. All right, Dylan.
Thank you, Maren. And I think for a lot of those metrics, that's absolutely the case. There isn't enough data necessarily about how many renters are being served by programs versus single family, to set a goal around that. But I'm not sure I would take that all the way to say there isn't enough information to set an overall objective of how much these programs should save. And I'm not sure, I don't mean to put words in your mouth. I don't know that you were saying that, but I do think that's a distinction. I think that there is a need to get baseline data, and a bunch of those metrics will be absolutely helpful for that purpose. They may never turn into goals, or they may turn into goals. But I think it's still the case that it is helpful to Joe's point. I don't think having an overall savings goal is going too far on the seesaw of having, getting bogged down in goals. That's having an overall objective for what the program should accomplish. And we've spent 10 years on that, on having whether there should be a limited income goal and what it should, and I think the time has come to have one.
Yeah, go ahead, Maren.
Thank you. Dylan, that's a very fair point. And I think that makes sense. If the data is there, it's been worked on quite a bit. So I was honestly not thinking in terms of that specific item. I was thinking more in terms of overall the metrics discussion. So, but thank you.
Jim, give me 1 second. Amy, did you want to try again? Okay, we'll come back to you, Amy. Jim, go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. And I hate to go back to the potential study, but one of the things that the potential study I think could be useful for, certainly, is it's supposed to, as I understand it, look at the savings that are available to the limited income community. And probably we'll look at what are the technologies or the program approaches that are going to achieve those savings. And I think my view at the moment, after listening to all this conversation, is when that comes forward and we look at it and say, wow, here are some programs that are clearly in the utilities wheelhouse and that are not going to compete with these other programs that are clearly in DHCD's wheelhouse, then that's a kind of a reasonable way to break it apart. If that's not apparent at the moment, given the commission order that says y'all are supposed to be doing this coordination and driving increased participation anyway, I'd say let's just give DHCD the goal, make sure it's high enough that it encompasses all the program opportunities, and maintain that expectation from the commissions that the utilities are going to support it. That makes sense to me. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Amy, you with us? All right. We still can't hear you, Amy. I see you unmuted yourself. Heard something there. Go ahead, Amy. Still not hearing you. Maybe jump off and try and jump back on. All right. All right. We'll give Amy 1 second. I think we only have, anybody else want to weigh in? I think we only have one more issue to hit from last week. And that was Joe wanted to touch on the goal structure, gross versus net, and he thought that there might be some disconnect. All right.
Your Honor?
Yes. Yes.
This is Amy. Can you hear me now?
Yeah, got you loud and clear.
I apologize.
No problem.
I ended up just calling in, so I am not on the screen anymore. You might have already passed what I was going to talk about, but it was in regard to Dylan's comment about basing the PIM for the utilities on DHCD's performance. The utilities haven't specifically talked about this, so this is just my own opinion, but I think the utilities would prefer to be rewarded for their own performance and not performance of a party that we have no control over, frankly. So that was one thing I wanted to say. The other item had to do with the goal structure being based on a percent of budget rather than energy or GHG savings. And I think this goes a lot towards the idea of the utilities promoting DHCD's programs, which we currently do, and I think it does help because, as we've heard, customers tend to go to the utilities for help first, and if the utilities can then promote DHCD programs, that's a win for everybody. But the question is, if DHCD would receive credit toward any energy savings or GHG goal for doing that particular project, that means that the utilities would not be able to get the benefit of those savings in reaching their goals. So I think that's a good illustration of why the utilities want a percent of budget rather than a percent of energy savings or GHG savings, because that type of situation, if there were a GHG or energy savings goal, that would encourage the utilities to go out in competition with DHCD and do their own types of programs from which they could reap the benefit of an energy saving or GHG goal. That's all I wanted to say, and I apologize for all my trouble getting in.
It's no problem at all. I'm glad you were able to call back in. Don't go anywhere. You may have a question or two. Jim.
Thank you, Your Honor. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. And I think I want to make a more emphatic statement than I made before. I'm thinking about this in my decades in the industry. And, you know, when I worked both at utilities and at the low-income weatherization program, I'm not talking about a utility low-income or limited income program. But, you know, when I worked at the utility, our perspective was we want to do everything we can to help our customers who are distressed be able to manage their bills. And that means we're going to aggressively refer them to any programs that are available to them. And you can do that from the perspective of we care about our customers, but you can also be, it's motivated by purely pragmatic consideration. If we can help our customers manage our bills, we're going to have lower arrearages, we're going to have lower costs, and we're going to have to socialize across all of our other customers. So I don't want to be dismissive of the efforts that the utilities have been putting into promoting the DHCD programs for the customers. I think that's fantastic. I think it's appropriate and it's genuine, and I appreciate it. But I cannot get my hands around, especially given the commission order, any way to identify a spending goal, as a discrete thing to say, oh yeah, we're actually going to put some money behind this. It just doesn't make any sense to me. If there's not some kind of goal, some kind of specific accountability associated with the spending, I just don't get it, to be honest. I really think this is what the utilities should be doing anyway. Again, you don't have to, for so many reasons. So
well, I think
please,
the utilities
please continue
do that.
I know. So
Yeah.
so if you're already doing it, so then why do what's the value gained by attaching a spending goal to it? If you're already doing it, I don't understand what it gets us. And I know Lori said, well, we would do more of it. Well, I think you should do more of it anyway, shouldn't you? If you're not doing as much as you can to help these customers, that's what maybe it's just me. I'm just stuck on that. So,
well, I think all these. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I was just going to say, Your Honor, this may be a non-consensus item.
I gather. Go ahead, Amy.
Well,
Thank
thank you, Your Honor.
Did you want to respond at all, or we're just gonna? I don't want to cut you
Well,
off.
I think we've gone back and forth on the goal structure quite a bit. I just think it's unfair to the utilities, just from a goal structure perspective, and to DHCD, frankly, to have a goal structure for LMI programs that is based on the energy or GHG reduction savings. And that's the bottom line.
All right. Thank you, ma'am. All right. Nicole.
Thank you.
I just thought I understood Jim in the way that he thinks maybe there doesn't need to be a goal for the utilities at all if they're already doing a lot to promote DHCD's programs. That's how I understood it, but is that what you mean, Jim? Because
Thanks,
you
Nick.
think the spending goal wouldn't help with that if they're already doing it anyway?
I don't see why. It just seems like another thing to keep track of that doesn't add anything.
Okay, I just wanted to make sure I understand
Yeah.
that correctly, because that's a new concept we haven't even thought about in the last couple of discussions. It was always from the beginning sort of a given going into these discussions that we will come up with a goal for the utilities and DHCD. So that's a new concept now that maybe the utilities don't need one, just DHCD.
It's definitely my view has adjusted, and I'm sorry I didn't identify myself. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. My view is changing a little bit based on these conversations. I think I still believe that there is room and probably great benefit to there being specific program areas that are targeted or allocated or that the utilities implement for limited income customers, and likewise specific programs that DHCD implements. But if that's not something that we're going to get agreement on, then maybe it's better to just scrap that and have the utilities continue to focus on promotion and have an expanded role for DHCD, which is not inconsistent really with your most recent program plan filing, where you did expand the types of programs that you're offering.
Okay, great. Thanks for the clarification.
Thank you, sir. Julia.
Thank you, Your Honor. Julia Friedman with Oracle. Just to share another state's perspective on, where there's value in a spending goal. So Illinois, in the most recent legislation, actually in the last 2 energy bills, put significant spending goals for, for energy efficiency on limited income customers and those goals are applied to the utilities. I think, and what we've seen now that the utilities have had to develop plans that respond to the spending goals is it's a totally different way of organizing their programs and designing the whole portfolio. And so you see many more of the programs focused on serving low and moderate income households. And so to that question of what else do you get? I think in Illinois, we've seen you get like radically different portfolios that the utilities are offering. Thanks.
All right, thank you, ma'am. Jim.
Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. Thank you. But Julia, isn't it the case in Illinois that the state agency, and it's not DHCD, it's D something else, is no longer responsible for implementing any of the low-income programs? They've all gone back to the utilities?
Correct.
So they're not, the utility programs that are attached to a spending goal in Illinois are about getting savings.
They are part of the broader goal that a utility has to meet.
Yeah, but they're to get savings. They're not just to promote somebody else's programs.
But there are no specific savings goals for limited income customers that utilities have to meet.
So sure, so the utilities could spend all that money, accomplish nothing for it, and get their performance incentives based on the savings they get from other programs. I think the commission would probably frown on that.
Right. I mean, we still have rate impact caps, and there are other things to help control and guide a successful portfolio.
Sure. So I just think it's a different conversation if we're talking about the utilities are implementing the programs, or if somebody else is, in this case, DHCD is implementing the programs and the utilities have a spending goal with not something specific attached to it. It's just my opinion.
Okay, that's fair. Yeah, right. It is a different construct. I do think that the utilities, again, I think we probably come at this from different perspectives of like I'll probably be more deferential to the utilities for designing programs for their customers' needs.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And of course, part of this change, the reason, in Illinois is because the state agency that was running the programs had not been very successful with the limited income programs. It's my understanding, part of why those programs went back to the utilities. So pretty different, I think, scenario, but yeah,
I don't think that was entirely why,
discussion.
but their budget was getting very caught up in the fact that Illinois had no budget for a long time. And so those programs suffered dramatically. So again, it's not a fair comparison, perhaps. Yeah.
Thank you.
All right, thank you. Anybody else want to hit on this before we hit our last topic?
So this is Scott with DHCD. I think if we're considering just the coordination aspect of it, when we started working with the utilities with the coordination and outreach, part of the conversation from the beginning was, let us see if we have some money in our budget to be able to do this. And so I think if coordination is a major part of their programs, even though it'd be a minor part of their major program, if it was, it ended up being an actual responsibility or programmatic feature, it would make sense to have a specific budget laid out or defined for that assistance. Where right now they don't have that, and so that could be a benefit to having a spending goal for support purposes. I think there's value in that.
All right. Thank you, sir. Any follow-up, Scott, or any other comments on this one? Yes, Nicole.
Yes, thank you, Your Honor. Nicole Zeichner on behalf of OPC. This is going back to something we discussed earlier, and I'm sorry to go back to this, but we didn't put a name on the type of proceeding that we think might be useful for developing the greenhouse gas goals. And I think a legislative style proceeding would be the type of proceeding that will more likely allow all entities to participate without any type of protracted litigation. So we just wanted to say we've discussed that further, and that would be our recommendation for what it's worth. Thank you, Your Honor.
All right. Anybody else? All right. Joe, do you want to tee up your issue, sir?
Sure. Oh, I have a huge echo out there. I sent an email right before the meeting. I apologize for the last minute send. In the last meeting, in the context of the various proposed PIMs and how we incentivize utilities to do what we really want them to do, I just kept thinking about the goal as currently constructed from the work group, as I understood it, that it was a gross savings goal. So it's a life cycle goal. That's a major improvement over our current goal, which is first year. And I like the GHG. So you're driving to something that you care about. But it's a gross savings goal still is what's being proposed, which means that free riders activity that was already going to occur is counted towards the goal savings. And we have a few concerns about that, which I outlined in the email. And I can elaborate at much length on any of these if people want. But in a nutshell, the goals communicate to the world what the Empower programs are doing and in this context, how much they're contributing to Maryland state goals and global greenhouse gas emissions reduction goals. And so to the extent that the goals are communicating savings or telling people that you're achieving savings that the programs are not in fact causing, then it seems like at least a miscommunication that's going on. And it's kind of, to me, it's kind of a dangerous one to the extent that we need all hands on deck and all resources on deck. And so if energy efficiency, the Empower programs are, if we're communicating that the Empower programs are saving more than they are, then that means maybe people think they don't need to go do some other stuff that they might need to do. So for me, it's a very big, real issue. The second, and by the way, when I say me, usually I'm in very close consultation with Dan too. So he and I have talked about all this. So the second is that the gross savings goal has created some perverse incentives that affect portfolio decisions and program design. And for example, there are there's very much the thing that the utilities, at least throughout the history of Empower, from my perspective, have focused on is the gross savings goal. That's the binding constraint, as y'all are all saying. People, you create a goal so that people will go drive toward it. In this case, though, having a gross savings goal means that you can have a lot of free ridership in a program, but as long as you're touching the measures, then you can claim them towards your gross savings goal. So that means that, for me, the poster child is the Energy Star retail products platform, where the utilities pay rebates to the retailers, around the country, national retailers for stocking practices, to change their stocking practices and to market or do whatever they're going to do. I don't know that there's real specific requirements on what they do, but so they pay. It's like on the order of $5 per appliance, very small. And when we do our net to gross studies on that program, get net to gross that are like 5, in some cases it varies by measure, but I think the highest one last year was 15%. for the measures in there. That means that 85% of the savings that you're claiming from that measure wasn't caused by the Empower programs. And overall, just for reference, about 30%, about 70% of the savings that is being claimed as goal is actually caused by the programs. So basically, the gross goal savings goal is currently overstating what the impact of the programs are by 30 divided by 70. So by 40% or something. Third, the third justification or argument for using a net goal rather than a gross goal is related to cost effectiveness, which was a discussion around the PIMS. So everyone should be aware that the primary cost effectiveness tests that are used currently count rebates as transfers, not costs. And so the utilities can pay out $1 gazillion for rebates, and those don't count as cost in the total resource cost test or the societal cost test, because that's money that's flowing from the utilities or ratepayers to participants in the programs. And so there's no economic cost that's been incurred. There's no resources that you don't have available now. All you've done is take money from one place and give it to somebody and give it to another somebody. So this has implications, one for on the equity side, and that people with higher incomes tend to be able to go out and purchase the high efficiency HVAC system anyway without the rebate. They would have done it. It's just the way they roll. And so you have some bias that's occurring there, where a gross savings goal is going to at least not recognize that the free ridership that is higher amongst wealthier people, participants in the programs. The gross savings goal, to the extent that it's not really driving savings, is not contributing to reductions in utility costs or to utility or to customer bills. It looks like it from the outside, but really it's not doing anything that wasn't going to happen anyway. But nevertheless, you've spent whatever administrative funds and whatever rebates and transfers that you've done, to achieve what we used to call vapor watts. And so a couple things, or what Dan and I are proposing is that be reconsidered. Our understanding from last summer actually was that there was a decision made, and there was debate around this. So it's not like we didn't discuss it. And the decision was made to go to gross savings. And I do a lot of arm waving and throw up my hands, but when we started talking PIMS and the conversations today, where people are really trying to figure out how we drive the utilities to go do what we want them to do, I just felt I would be remiss if I didn't re-raise the issue as being very relevant in that context. And finally, I just want to say one of the challenges with this, and a lot of jurisdictions don't use net savings; they use gross savings. And typically the biggest argument for that is that it's very hard to do it, very hard to estimate what people were going to do, what would they have done but for the program. But that's what I do every day in my job as an evaluator and cost effectiveness, analyst and overseer or whatever I am, is deal with what were people going to do. And so if we say that we're not going to we're going to ignore free ridership because we can't be sure, then I would throw out the whole regime, because there's uncertainty everywhere we turn. If all of you participated in our discussions around non-energy benefits, hugely impactful on our cost effectiveness. And I think if it wasn't before, it became clearly apparent how much uncertainty and judgment and philosophical bents go into those numbers. It's a daily thing that we have to deal with. And finally, though, I want to say that or make clear that one way with a PIMS or with goals, having clear evaluation assumptions and methods so that whoever's subject to those goals, whoever's bound by them, understands how they're going to be evaluated is critical. Otherwise, you're just going to have you got to do it up front. To the extent that you do it on the backside, people are going to argue loudly. On the front side, they're going to argue, but at least everybody can get an agreement, and then you can figure out what your goal percentage or whatever is, and that jives with how you're going to evaluate those things. Especially when we're talking about a PIMS that's based on some sort of cost effectiveness, meaning some sort of relationship between savings and how much you spend. There's a lot of assumptions that are going to have to go into that. We got depending on exactly how you do it, but you got to deal with even participant costs, perhaps. You got to deal with at least program costs, how those get allocated. There's a lot of challenges with that. I don't want to. I would hate to unnecessarily complicate that with a net savings structure, and I would propose that in those contexts where you're not just providing information to stakeholders, but you actually got people bound by a goal or an incentive, that the net savings would be stipulated up front, would be deemed. In other words, we would all agree up front, either at the portfolio level or individual program level, even measure level if you wanted to, but I would say program or portfolio level, that you agree on what your net to gross assumption is. And what that does is it then drives the utilities in their program portfolios to not be going to programs that are low net, high gross. And it also communicates to the outside that the impact that the programs are really having. So I apologize to everyone, because I am reluctant and had conversations with Dan about even bringing this to the group, because it was discussed and there's so much to discuss, and I don't want to be the person who makes us all have to go rehash things. But I just felt in the context of the last week's meeting that we should raise it.
All right. Thanks, Joe. A lot there to unpack. Anybody want to jump in? Yep. Go ahead, sir.
Thank you, sir. Jim Gravatt on behalf of the Energy Efficiency Advocates. And Joe and Dan, I really appreciate you raising this, and we're very open to continuing this conversation. And I think our position has long been a preference for net savings, but it's wasn't the fall on the sword issue for us. So we're very open. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, sir. Anybody else? Is it fair to say that folks probably want a little bit more time to digest Joe's comments and his email from this morning?
That is fair, Your Honor.
Okay. All right. All right, we'll do that then. We can tack that on to next week's discussion then. Just somebody, if I forget, please remind me. So we'll add this gross versus net issue to next week. Why don't we plan on kicking off with it to get it out of the way? Or you know what? No, since we'll have all the PIM folks, we'll put it at the end, so we don't have to subject them to stuff that they're not interested in. All right. As far as I know, I think that's everything. Does anybody have anything else they want to raise, or did I miss anything?
Judge McLean, I just wanted to make an offer to everyone
Please.
that if you want further discussion of this during the week before the next meeting, or me to gather up more info or anything like that, I'm happy to help support it in any way to help expedite it so it doesn't bog us down. I guess it can't really bog us down because there's already a decision been made. So basically people just walk away from it. But
No problem, Joe. All right. Thank you, sir. All right. Anybody else? Did I miss any issues? Anything you want to raise? All right. So we'll look for any kind of PIM comments on the 7th, and we'll see everybody on the 10th. I will try and send out the invite this afternoon so I don't forget and send it out Wednesday afternoon. So with that, we will see everyone next week. Take care, everyone.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Anna.